Guys, this is my weekend review of all the boxing. Unfortunately, I had a wedding at the weekend, and so this has been a little bit delayed. And so what I'm going to try and do here is do a double-header review. We've got Joyce against Filip Hrgovic up first, and then second, we've got Tszyu against Joey Spencer. Normally, these would be in separate videos, but seeing as I've not got much time, and YouTube doesn't really like it when you post too many videos in the space of a few hours, we're going to do these in one video. So if there's a particular fight that you want to hear about, make sure you skip ahead. I'll chat to the video and let you know where the different fights are talked about. But hopefully you'll watch through the whole thing, and I hope you enjoy my thoughts on these fights. Joyce loses to Filip Hrgovic by unanimous decision. With his career now hanging by a thread, where does he go from here? And what next for Filip Hrgovic? He says he's itching to get revenge on Daniel Dubois, but is that realistic? In this video, I break down the fight between the two men before looking ahead and trying to figure out what is the right next move for each man. Hello everyone and welcome back to A Guy Called Henry. We're rattling through these videos today because there's so much to talk about and so much to catch up on. This fight I really enjoyed. You know, I watched it and I thought it was actually a very even contest. I wasn't sure what we were going to get because for both men, they'd both come off difficult losses. Joyce, as I say, now lost 4 of his last 5 matches. Someone who looked like he was destined to go and fight for a world title. It really looked to me like he was an unstoppable, immovable object and was going to walk his way through all the punches to a heavyweight title. That's how it looked at one point. But with the recent losses we've seen him take, with the recent damage we've seen him take, the right hands that have put him down, the shots that have dropped him, it really gives a whole new context to his CV. And that's something I want to look at and talk about in this video. I want to look at the wins he has and that myth that was built around this sort of granite chin that he has. Was it actually a granite chin? Is this chin actually as good as ever? But in reality, he's just been found out. When he's gone in there with a bigger puncher, they just happen to have the power to affect him. Because at the end of the day, he ate a lot of shots against Hrgovic. And as for Filip Hrgovic, what do we say about him? Well, he lost that Daniel Dubois fight, but I have to say this, there are only a few things that are certain in life. Death, taxes, Joyce getting hit repeatedly on the chin in a fight, and Filip Hrgovic gassing out basically after round 1 and also probably getting cut. It seems to be the trademarks for these two men now. As I say, Joyce got punched so much, and Hrgovic, I don't know what it is with this guy, man, but he got unbelievably tired in there to the point where he was having to lean on the ropes for large portions of the rounds and bait in Joyce and then land big counter shots, which he was doing. In isolation, if you just go and look at the highlights of this fight, it looked like there was, relentless action. But at the end of the day, the pace was set fairly high by Joyce, but Hrgovic maneuvered his way through it. And fair enough, he came in a bit on late notice. I think it was 5 weeks sort of notice he had for the fight, maybe 4. So he wouldn't have had the training camp he wanted. But honestly, did his fitness level really look that different from the Dubois fight? Not to my mind. So I think he's got a fundamental issue that he needs to figure out with his fitness. So I want to talk about his fitness. I also want to talk about his perceivable power because, as I said, he hit Joyce with a lot of shots in this fight. And so there's an interesting debate to be had there. Before I get into this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new, bang a like on the video, and get your comments in the comments section below. What next for Joyce and what next for Hrgovic? So let's start by just a brief tactical overview of this fight. I thought it was quite interesting, and I thought Joyce did the right thing by coming in there. He tried to set a very high pace, and he used his jab very effectively. He was jabbing a lot, landing some good jabs. The biggest problem Joyce has, and always will have, is that he gets hit so much, and far too much. It's so easy to pepper him with big shots to the head. And fundamentally, he's just too slow. His hand speed's not very good. On certain shots, it's a bit quicker. His jab is quite nice. He's always had pretty good footwork, so he doesn't struggle to get to the pocket. But Hrgovic was able to land that right hand time and time again. I think for me, Joyce, earlier in his career, or not even that long ago, I mean, when was his last victory? It was against Joseph Parker in 2022. So to be fair, it was 3 years ago now. But 3 years ago, as I said, he seemed to be this immovable object, and his biggest strength was that war of attrition that he would create in the ring. He would wear you down, he would tire you out, he'd make you believe that you just couldn't hurt him before he'd eventually take you out himself. I always thought that he'd be too slow at the top level. I did. But then I started to really question that when he beat Parker. I was like, damn. But then since that sort of come out, Parker's claimed that he wasn't well for the fight, that he was sick, and that's why Joyce was able to beat him. But Joyce had some other good wins as well. I mean, just to refresh myself, Christian Hamer's not a great win. Takam's a decent win. The Dubois win was obviously big, but that was a very fresh Dubois. A Dubois that had that quit in him. And we saw that come again against Usyk, but that was the first real sign of it. But a very, very green, very, very fresh Dubois. A much fresher Joyce as well. He had more energy at that time. He probably was even a little bit quicker then, even though he was never fast. So the context is everything here. And when you look back through his record, I want to talk about that chin of his. I think there's a genuine debate to be had that he's obviously got a good chin because we saw him get hit clean a lot. When he's in there with a genuinely top level puncher, is it just that he's in there with really big punches now? Or is it that he actually has a very good chin. And I raised this question because, like I said, Hrgovic landed so many right hands. But then there's the other side of this, which is Filip Hrgovic's right hand was a shot I saw land time and time again against Daniel Dubois, and everyone's sort of saying, wow, Dubois' chin is absolutely ridiculous. But then I'm sort of wondering, well, I saw him land that many right hands against Dubois. I've seen him land that many right hands against Joyce, who supposedly had lost his punch resistance. And he doesn't really seem to be able to put a really significant dent in guys. I mean, sure, he deters them from coming forward for a period of time, but he's not startling them. He's not knocking them down. And so I think there's two factors here. One is, how good is Joyce's chin? Two, how powerful is Hrgovic's right hand? And both are difficult to answer. I'd say that overall with Joyce, the shots that have really knocked him down have been by hellacious punches. Zhilei Zhang, 2 knockouts against him, 2 knockout losses against him. And we all know he's probably the biggest puncher in the active heavyweight division right now. Wilder arguably too, but Zhang's so much more adept at actually landing the shots, has such better fundamentals and better feet than Wilder, that I would say overall, Zhang's probably the more fearful puncher. And then also dropped by Chisora in that fight. I believe that, I mean, that's an interesting one to look at, but I remember, I'll never forget Dave Allen saying that Chisora's right hook, was the most disgusting punch he's ever felt in his life. So I think that both the guys that have knocked him down or beaten him by stoppage have just been really, really big punches. Should Joyce have lost to Chisora? Probably not, but then Chisora had a pretty smart game plan in there and he threw effective counter punches, and it was actually a very similar game plan for Hrgovic. I think Hrgovic will have learned from that fight, and the lesson was you don't have to have a massive gas tank to beat him. You've just got to make sure that you block most of the work he does, and then you will get chances to land big, clean, effective shots, which are much more attractive scoring shots for the judge. Now, I do think it was a close fight, but I had no problem with Hrgovic getting the decision because, as I say, I felt even though Joyce threw a lot more punches, Hrgovic's punches were much cleaner, much more effective, much, much easier to score. A topic for a big debate is how many punches Joyce ate in this fight, and I think that it's something that people have been talking about for a while now, this concern around Joe Joyce, because for years we were all sort of like, wow, this guy eats a lot of punches, surely that's going to affect him at some point in his career. And I think this narrative has been developing with him of, well, he's been knocked out by Zhang twice, he was knocked down by Chisora, and clearly his punch resistance is going. And also, because he's a very slow speaker, because he loses train of thought quite a bit, people are suggesting that he's starting to show signs of CTE, of brain damage from taking too many shots to the head. But to be honest with you, I think he's always spoken like that. I haven't noticed a significant deterioration. He's always kind of been a bit slow in the way he talks, and he's always been a bit spaced out and a little bit like, you know, thoughtful, and really takes his time to find his answers. And sometimes he doesn't even really answer. And I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think there's been a massive regression there. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think Joe Joyce, the question I'm trying to answer here is, should Joe Joyce continue? Because this is what everyone wants to sort of say is it dangerous for him to continue? Should he be allowed to continue? And the question was put to him in an interview with Umar after the fight in the Box Nation channel. And he seemed somewhat offended that Umar had suggested that he might not continue. And he was sort of like, and Umar was like, why would you want to continue? And Joe Joyce reminded us of that factor, that it's easy for us to forget as fans, which is that this is my job, is what he said in reply. This is what I do. I get paid. This is how I make money. And the aftercare for fighters, as we all know, is not there. The career paths for fighters typically is not really laid out. A lot of them are from working class backgrounds. I mean, Joe Joyce, I know, is somebody who's very interesting. He's into video games. He's an artist. I know he's a different kind of character, but he loves athletics. He loves sport. And clearly this is what he loves doing and wants to keep doing. And I think he will continue whether you guys like it or not, whether I like it or not. I think my main piece of criticism and feedback for him is just, you've got to improve your defense. And it's been there the whole way through. I don't know if he can, because it's obviously, he would if he could, I would suppose. I suppose it's a situation of he might need saving from himself. Because I think what he's failing to understand here, the reason he's getting offended by that question is he sort of thinks people are saying, oh, I'm not good anymore, I don't deserve to be in there. It's not that at all. It's that people have seen what this sport has done to other fighters, and the writing's on the wall a bit when you eat that many punches. So Joe Joyce, a message to you, if you want people to stop asking you those questions, you've got to stop getting hit so much. Because any fighter that gets hit that much, people are going to ask questions. People are going to say, should this person continue? Because it becomes more and more dangerous the more punishment accumulates throughout your career. My genuine opinion is if he wants to continue, he should. Even if that leads to health complications, I think it's his choice at the end of the day. If he wants to do that, if he wants to risk himself, that's on him. But if you want people to stop asking you those questions, you've got to do something about the amount of punches you're taking. And it might just be that he can't. He might be too slow. And I think that might be really part of the problem, to be honest. But I think the way that he has to go about fights from a strategic point of view means he's probably always going to get hit. I don't think he has the elusiveness to not get hit. And so I'm sort of talking this out, my thought process. I'd say he probably should stop because he does get hit too much. And I don't think he's good enough to ever go and win a world title. And I mean, he's just going to develop into a bit of a gatekeeper. Well, he talked about Chisora and how Chisora's had this long career, but Chisora, I think he's going to have real issues when he's finished. And maybe these guys don't care, but I think Chisora will have serious issues when he's finished. So yeah, it's a difficult one. If he wants to do it, he should. But I think that when you're taking that many punches, I think it's fair enough for people to say that you need to think about retiring, you need to think about stopping. Now, as for Filip Hrgovic, I mentioned earlier in the video, the biggest concern for me with him is his gas tank. And there's another thing, which is for me, his punch power. It's so hard to tell whether or not he's just not a very big puncher or if he's been in there again with guys with big chins. I mean, to go back to that point I was making before about Joyce, when you do run through his record, there's just not that many big punchers in there. And I really think that might be more what it is. I think his chin is probably above average and pretty good. And he ate shots from guys who couldn't punch that hard. And then he goes in there with guys that can punch hard. And then suddenly his chin looks reduced. So what I'm going to say is I think Hrgovic is a fairly normal puncher at heavyweight, but nothing special. The fact that Dubois ate so many punches from him, I've never seen Dubois actually knocked out. Dubois has been stopped, but that's because he chose to stop. He's been superficially damaged, like he's had supposedly broken eye sockets and things like that. And that is why he quit against Joyce, and the Usyk loss was because, you know, he was knocked down for sure, but he was not knocked out. He definitely could have continued in that fight. So I think that Dubois probably again does have a pretty damn solid chin. But I will say at the same time, I think Hrgovic could improve that technique on his right hand, and I just don't think there's real power behind it. So it's an average heavyweight right hand. So I think there's a mixture in here of Hrgovic. The biggest problems for him are his gas tank and the fact he doesn't really punch that hard. That's the issue as I see it for him. But the gas tank issue is the #1 priority. How does he get fitter? There was a really interesting, I saw Hatman talk about something really interesting, and I think it was Fabio Wardley. Or no, it was Moses Tszyu had been in his camp. And he said that he felt that, I think it was one of those two. They said that they felt that Hrgovic was training too hard in the camp. It was basically implied that he overtrains, and that is why he struggles so much with fatigue. Well, for sure in this one, he was likely undertrained because of the amount of time he had to prepare for it. But to be honest with you, he looked similarly fit to the Dubois fight. There wasn't really a massive difference in terms of his perceivable gas tank that was on display. And with that in mind, we have to sort of stop and say, okay, there's something not right here. As an athlete, if you look the same after a full camp and then like a 5-week camp or a 4-week camp, something's not quite adding up. Something's not quite connecting. So maybe he normally overtrains. This time, maybe he was undertrained. Maybe now he can find that sweet spot where he is actually at his fittest. And I think if Hrgovic can sort out his fitness issues, you've got a real handful because his chin is clearly fantastic. He can take solid shots all night. Against Dubois even, he was stopped, but it was on cuts. So the dude is really, really tough. He's a decent boxer. He's got decent ring IQ. He's got a nice jab. He does land the right hand well, even though it's not super powerful. He's adept at landing that right hand. He's got a win against Zhilei Zhang, who was much more prime at the time than he obviously is now. So I think Hrgovic can still be a real factor in the heavyweight division, and it's a good win for him to get back in the mix. I think next for him, if he can get a shot against anybody in the top 10, if you're him, you just take it. And likewise, I don't think any heavyweights will really be too worried about beating him. I don't think he's a particularly intimidating puzzle anymore. We've only seen him lose once, but you know, even in that Joyce fight, Joyce, as I say, very slow hands, you know, was doing very well in the fight. I don't think he's got that intimidation factor that he once had, Filip Hrgovic. So anyone in the top 10 won't be too worried about fighting him. But the thing that will probably make it difficult for him will be that he's not really got much of a draw. His name's not that big. And so the aim for him's got to be to maneuver himself some kind of mandatory shot. I think that will be the key for him. But those are my overall thoughts. I think if Joyce is going to have a fight next, I think his best chance of getting a decent name is probably to fight a Brit, because that's where his name is biggest. I think the Dillian Whyte fight still makes a lot of sense. Although, now he's lost, will Whyte even want that as a comeback fight? I'm really not sure. And I think if you're Joyce, you'll probably be pretty disappointed it wasn't Dillian Whyte, because I think he probably would have won that, Dillian Whyte looking so terrible in his last fight. But he's moving into that territory if he's not careful with, you know, 4 losses in his last 5 of becoming a gatekeeper. And that's when you start thinking, okay, maybe a Moses Atama, maybe that's the fight to make. Maybe a Justice Hooney, if he wants to try and beat a prospect and get back in the mix, then those make sense in a way. If he wants to go down level, David Alalai maybe, but again, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what's the point in him doing that when he's been at that level already. Anyway, guys, those are my final thoughts on it. It was an entertaining fight, an entertaining scrap, and I understand the concerns people have for Joyce, and Hrgovic has got also out of that gas tank. Guys, get your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think about all the thoughts I've given you in this video. Okay, now time to review fight number 2. Has Tszyu improved? He got a win at the weekend, a 4th round knockout against Joey Spencer, but has he actually changed since that Murtazaliez defeat? And do I think he can compete again at the top of the 154-pound division? We're going to try and answer these questions in this part of the video before looking ahead to see if I think that he can beat Keith Thurman in a fight up next. Okay guys, so this is video number 2, as I mentioned before, and I know it's a bit weird doing this all in one video, but I just decided, you know what, I think YouTube's not going to love it if I post 3 videos in about 12 hours. You get this thing where the views sort of cannibalize one another. If you have a video too close together, it won't give it the natural organic push that it needs. So I'm going to put this out so that it's good for Aussies and it's good for the guys in the UK as well. Because different audiences for these fights, different degrees of interest. But I think that both really worth talking about, both had significant implications for their divisions. So let's talk about this fight. I actually had a pretty high-performing video when I just really come back to doing YouTube, when I did a tactical breakdown of the Tszyu against Bakram Murtazaliez fight. And that one was really interesting to me because I was so shocked in that fight at how sloppy Tszyu was. And I hadn't watched loads of Tszyu before that, but I always had a pretty high opinion of him. I thought he was a really good come-forward fighter. I felt like he had really good skills and good fundamentals. And then watching that get so brutally exposed against Murtazaliez, it really made me rethink my perspective on him. And watching it, I just thought, wow, this guy needs to go back to the drawing board because he's been brutally exposed here. Murtazaliez just had the right game plan to beat Tszyu. Those straight punches were far too direct and far too effective for Tszyu to deal with. And I think going into this Joey Spencer fight, Joey Spencer, a guy who I had not watched before, a guy who doesn't have a high-profile win, and somebody that you just kind of think he's been put in there to make Tszyu feel good again, to get his confidence back, to feel like he can go in there and beat decent levels of opposition. And I thought Joey Spencer did a decent job of moving around in there, making himself reasonably difficult to hit, and he tried to give it back to Tszyu, but I think the first thing to say about this fight is that Joey Spencer just really did not have the tools to bother Tszyu. He just couldn't affect him like that. When you look at the stature of Murtazaliez, the jab, the slickness, the lateral movement, the punching power, you know, he doesn't have any of those things, Joey Spencer, let alone the size. I think that, as I say, those straight shots, those straight counters of Murtazaliez were so effective against Tszyu for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes Tszyu leads off with shots to the body, hooks to the body. And if you do that, then it opens you up for those straight punches down the middle. But also, he does tend to pull back in straight lines at times, and Murtazaliez folded him in when he did that. He'd dodge that first phase shot, but then the second phase shot would come as he'd step through, switching his stance as he did it at times as well. And then the other major flaw that Tszyu showed in that fight was his guard is just far too far back at times, far too far forward at times as well. And it means that you can throw bent arm shots that go around the guard. And Murtazaliez, his whole strategy was just perfectly designed to beat Tszyu. And so in this one, I wanted to see Tszyu just boxing a really effective fight. I wanted to see if he'd been looking to repair some of those deficiencies in camp. And there was a couple of things I saw him do quite well. You know, he was on his jab very nicely. I thought he found the range with the jab and he tried to set everything up off that jab. So that was encouraging to see. And I thought, you know what? But then, you know, I went back and I watched the Murtazaliez fight again. He did try and use that jab largely against Murtazaliez, but I feel that he got a bit complacent and he came off that game plan at times. There was one moment in particular against Murtazaliez for the knockout when he's got him backed up on the ropes, Tszyu, and rather than throwing the jab and continuing to probe, control the guard, make sure that your guard's nice and tight, he sort of dips down and goes to throw that left hook to the body, and it was just so readable. Leading off with that shot, Murtazaliez was very good at being patient as well. He would wait for Tszyu to throw something, and then he would counter with those straights down the middle. And I think that Tszyu, one thing he did do better in this fight was when he led off, he had a good guard, a nice high guard. He didn't use his head movement as much as I'm used to seeing in this one. It was a lot more about the high guard and the range control with the feet and the jab. Against Murtazaliez, he started off in a way where I really enjoyed it. It's something that I think Benavidez is the best example of a fighter that does this right now. That come forward counter puncher where the head movement's really, really good, but he makes you miss, he makes you pay, and he's patient with it. He applies the foot pressure, and then he lets you throw something first so he can then attack off that, work off your own jab. I think that that's the style that Tszyu needs to try and perfect because I feel like that really plays to his biggest attributes. And he can do all these things. It's just he gets off his game plan sometimes. But to be honest with you, in this fight, I couldn't tell you whether or not he's improved that part of himself, the concentration, because Joey Spencer really didn't have much to offer. What I will say is that this will have built Tszyu's confidence. He seemed very relieved in the post-fight interviews afterwards, and he himself talked about that, finding that range with that jab in the mid-rounds. One thing that did kind of set alarm bells off for me and trying to figure out if he's actually improved or not was when he was able to finish Joey Spencer, he was opening up and he was exposing himself a bit. So it makes me feel like that's probably still in him. When he gets carried away, when he gets a little bit excited and thinks, oh, the finish is there, he is still prone to sitting in the pocket, not getting his head off the line probably enough, and throwing combinations. He overwhelmed Joey Spencer, but another guy like Murtazaliez will probably time him in that scenario. But at the same time, it also shows finishing instinct. It shows bravery and an ability to get in the pocket and let his hands go. So it's good to see that that is still in him if he needs it. So overall, a decent outing for Tszyu, a good confidence builder, and there's only so much you can really say about it. So what do I think he should do next? What do I think the right next move for him is? Well, I do think that the Keith Thurman fight is very interesting. I think that Keith Thurman would be a very, very good test for him because Keith Thurman, I almost sort of view him in some ways as a Murtazaliez light, in that he also uses that good lateral movement. He moves around the man, he pops the jab. He's very slick, Keith Thurman, but he's older now and he's not as good as he once was. He's also not a natural 154-pounder. So when I say Murtazaliez light, I don't mean in terms of the raw talent that he has, but I do mean in terms of his stature, his natural size, and the fact that he's older now, and we know what vulnerabilities Thurman has. We know that Thurman probably almost definitely doesn't have as much left as he once did. But I also don't think it's a guarantee that Tszyu wins that fight either. And I think if he can beat a Keith Thurman, it would be a very, very good learning fight for him to be able to develop his style and implement stuff that he's just, to show he can implement the things that we didn't see against Murtazaliez. But I also do think that, again, another reason Thurman is sort of Murtazaliez light in a sense is that I don't think the punch output will be anywhere near like what Murtazaliez was throwing out in that fight. But I do think it's a good fight to make. And I hope that there's lots of money on the table if you're Keith Thurman, because it's a young, fresh guy who could just, out-athletic him, to put it simply. He's younger, he's fresher, he's got more in the tank than Thurman does, most likely. Although Thurman might still have more left than we think. He's had a lot of years off, but it worried me how slowly he started his own fight in his comeback match. I felt that he boxed really well in the end, and he took out the guy, Brock, that was his name. He took him out relatively well and in good fashion, and I thought he looked good in parts, but he also looked kind of old and tired in moments as well, especially at the beginning. But that doesn't mean that he's not there still. It just means he might have needed a bit of time to warm into it. So long story short, yes, it's a yes from me for Tszyu against Keith Thurman. Make that fight. I think it's the right next fight to rebuild Tszyu. At the same time, if you're Keith Thurman, you'll be interested in that fight. And Keith Thurman will probably think he can win that fight as well. And if Tszyu can't beat Keith Thurman, it really is the end of the road for him. So I don't know how he's going to do in that fight. I hope that he's not been rushed back. I hope that he is learning and is developing and is ready to go and learn from the mistakes of that Murtazaliez loss, because if not, it might well happen again, because there's some very, very good, very, very big and talented fighters at 154 pounds. Anyway, guys, get in the comments below. Let me know what you made of Tszyu's performance. Do you want to see that Keith Thurman fight? Do you think he can beat a Keith one-time Thurman? And what is Tszyu's ceiling? Is he going to go and win a world title? Or do you think this is it now? He's got as good as he's going to be, and we've got to just kind of accept that about him. I'm under no illusions. I know how important he is to the Australian boxing fans. I know how important he is to the Australian boxing scene. He will help to bring other fighters through by having events and by having them on his card. It's really important for Australia that he does well. But at the same time, we have to be honest about where he's at. And I do think that there's a lot of work to be done. And I can't tell if that work's been done or not from the fight he just had. The guy just wasn't good enough to test him. Drop your comments below, subscribe to the channel, bang a like, and I hope you've enjoyed this mega doubleheader breakdown. Let me know if you think this format works. If it doesn't, if it's a bit long and a bit annoying, I'll try and be more organized next time. Unfortunately, I had a wedding at the weekend, as I said, so you know how it is. Anyway, guys, as I always say, on to the next one.